Leviathan dreadnoughts were uniquely designed on Terra itself, not Mars, which made the Mechanicum very uneasy about them. They were overwhelmingly powerful, but had the side effect of draining their pilots exceptionally fast. All dreadnoughts do this, but the Leviathan does it exceptionally so. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Leviathan Dreadnought of the Horus Heresy. The Legion Leviathan Dreadnought Talon is its full name, but that's far too long. The Legion Leviathan comes in at 270 points base. It has a very beefy stat line. It moves 6 inches, it has weapon skill and ballistic skill 5, which means it's hitting on 2s at range and is hitting on 3s against most Marines. It's strength 8 and toughness 8, so immensely hard hitting and hard to wound with most weapons. 7 wounds is a huge amount. It has initiative 4, which is totally average but not bad, and 5 attacks base, so it's leadership 9 and 2+ save. It has heavy, so it cannot run, and it is a dreadnought, which we'll cover in the special rules section. In terms of war gear, it comes with 2 Leviathan Siege Claws with melted guns built in. The Siege Claw is Strength 10, AP 2, Melee, and Brutal 3, so that is absolutely insane. Of course, Brutal meaning that you have to take 3 saves for it, and each one failed is a wound through, making him excellent against just about anything. And the Meltagun is range 12 with Strength 8, AP 1, Assault 1, and Armor Bane Melta, which gives him some surprising anti-tank punch. The 2 Heavy Flamers are chest-mounted. They are template ranged with Strength 5, AP 4, and Assault 1. Nothing special, but useful for clearing hordes, which this guy would struggle with otherwise. And his Antomantic Deflector is a 5+ invulnerable save, which is handy, and instant death is instead inflicts D3 wounds for each instead of just straight up killing the unit. And when this model dies, all models, both friendly and enemies, within D6 inches takes an automatic Strength 8 AP- hit. So he can do some damage when he dies, but it's nothing to be too worried about. Moving on to special rules, he has Legionis Astartes X, of course, and Dreadnought Talon. When this unit is deployed, all models must be placed in unit coherency, but afterwards each operate independently and are not treated as a unit. This is because you can take up to 3 of them in a single unit. We'll cover that in the options section. Hammer of Wrath is when this model ends a charge move, in base contact with an enemy, obviously. It makes a number of additional attacks equal to the value in brackets, so 3 attacks, at its unmodified strength with AP- and initiative 10, so another free 3 strength 8 AP0 attacks, which is useful just for clearing out infantry. It can move through cover, which means he suffers no penalties for moving through difficult terrain, which is very useful because he's already quite slow, or relatively slow, so being able to ignore that's very handy. And as a Dreadnought, he gains Fearless, so he cannot be pinned. He can move and shoot heavy ordnance and weapons as if he was stationary, and charge afterwards. And no unit with the Dreadnought keyword can join him, so no, say, Centurions or Praetors joining the unit. And successful wounds with Fleshbane weapons and poison weapons must be rerolled, and they can shoot everything when they are shooting, and shoot everything when they are doing a reaction. Overall, being a Dreadnought is great. It means you can't be pinned, you can't be scared, and also you get to shoot everything, though of course you cannot split fire. This is a very good stat line for 270 points, and great base kit, so honestly just at base the unit's already exceptional. But there's a lot that can be added to this. Moving on, we have its war gear options, of course. It may include up to 2 additional Leviathan Dreadnoughts, each at 270 points. And then any Legion Leviathan Dreadnought in the unit may replace either of its Legion Siege Claws and Melta Guns with one of the following: either a Siege Drill and an inbuilt Melta Gun for 5 points each, or a Leviathan Storm Cannon for 10 points each, a Cyclonic Melta Lance for 20 points each, or a Gravflux Bombard for 5 points each. The Leviathan Siege Drill gives you Strength 12, AP 2, and Armor Bane, which means you roll 2 dice for armor penetration. Very good for ripping apart any vehicle in the game, as you're already at Strength 12, which is huge, and the Melta Gun's the same as earlier. The Storm Cannon is a very interesting profile, with 24-inch range, Strength 7, AP 4, Heavy 6, Rending 5+, and Sunder, which means you get to roll a second armor pen dice and keep the highest. And Rending 5+, of course, meaning you get D3 extra strength when armor penetrating, or auto wounding at AP 2 on everything else. Very handy. Cyclonic Melta Lance is 18-inch range with Strength 8, AP 1, a Heavy 4, Armor Bane Melta. So this thing is, of course, your specialized anti-armor gun. It is quite good against armor, no doubt. Though for 20 points, I'm not sure if it's twice as good as the Storm Cannon, as the Storm Cannon's already quite good against most vehicles. Then the Gravflux Bombard is slightly complicated and also slightly disappointing. At 18-inch range, it doesn't have a strength characteristic and is AP 4. It's heavy 1 with a blast 5, which is handy enough. Graviton Collapse and Torsion Crusher ignores cover and Concussive 1. Concussive 1, of course, reducing initiative. Torsion Crusher, meaning that you inflict 2 whole points per successful penetrating hit. And ignore cover, ignores cover. Graviton Collapse means instead of rolling to wound normally, any model hit must roll 2d6, and if they roll equal to or less than their strength, then they're fine, or if they roll above it, then they suffer a wound. Saves and damage are all saved the same, though you can't make shrouded saves, and when attacking an armor value unit, roll 4d6 for the armor pen. So this is overall a sort of mediocre jack-of-all-trades weapon, as its AP4 lets it down against infantry, and 4d6, while yes, can spike very high, is also just as capable to roll very low. And whiff. And even with Torsion Crusher, you still need at least 2 of these hits to destroy something as weak and flimsy as a Rhino, even though you take 2, because obviously you need 3 to crush most of those tanks. And surprisingly enough, the Storm Cannon actually just rips these vehicles apart much easier than the Grav Flux Bombard, and also excels against infantry. Any of the... also, if you replace any of your melee weapons with a ranged weapon, you reduce your attack characteristics to 4, though this only happens once. And then any Legion Leviathan may take a Phosphex Discharger for 20 points. It's 18-inch range with Strength 5, AP 2, Heavy 1, Barrage, Blast 3 inches, Poisoned 3, Crawling Fire, and Lingering Death. Lingering Death means that the blast marker is left there, or a marker is left there, and that becomes difficult terrain. Poison means you always wound infantry on 3s. Barrage means you can shoot out of line of sight, though you have to scatter your shot without subtracting your ballistic skill. And Crawling Fire means you get to move your blast template if it will hit more models underneath it. Also, any Legion Leviathan may exchange its Heavy Flamers for 2 Twin-Linked Volkite Calivers. Twin-Linked means they reroll hit rolls. They're 30-inch range with Strength 6, AP 5, Heavy 3, and Deflagrate, so for every unsaved wound you get to roll another wound, which is handy for clearing infantry, and I'd say is a worthy enough upgrade for the 15 points it is over your standard Flamers. However, if you wanted to save the points, that's totally fine too, and I would generally just take the Phosphex Discharger on melee dedicated units, especially ones that would struggle against hordes. Aside from that, it's not very useful against tanks, so you can leave it at home. Dedicated transport-wise, a unit of 1, only 1, can take a Dreadclaw Drop Pod or Carbidus Assault Claw. Now, the Drop Pod is very fun and decent enough for ranged variants, and the Assault Claw is way too expensive in my opinion, but it is an assault vehicle, so you can get out and charge, but with a Dreadnought Drop Pod you cannot do that. It does count as a heavy support, as it's a dedicated transport. You still have to pay the points for it, but it doesn't take up a force organization slot, it just counts as a heavy support for other rules purposes. So, with that, I'll cover my preferred loadouts more in the best use section. We're going to move on now to a very brief buffs section, as there's not too much that directly buffs them that's not Legion specific. So, let's get on to that. First up, of course, when it comes to buffing, we have to cover the Tech Marine. The Tech Marine can heal Dreadnoughts on a 5+, which is handy enough, as their wounds are already hard to remove, so adding another one back is very good. Though he can't attach to Dread, so he'll have to walk with them attached to another squad. Something like a tactical support squad with plasma guns or rotors could be useful, or even just cheap tactical Marines could do the job just fine, though I'd say this probably isn't the best use or plan to go with. The Iron Father does much the same, though being a Praetor upgrade for the Iron Fists, it is, of course, significantly more expensive, but also more deadly. They offer very much the same thing aside from that, though, which is Battlesmith. The Iron Father does it on a 4+, and there are a couple of Legionis Consularis upgrades that affect giving your models Battlesmith, but they're more focused on Cybernetica Automata units, not so much Dreadnoughts, so I didn't bother to include them here, as they really don't provide anything that a Tech Marine doesn't. Alright, that was very short. Moving on to the Legion section, of course. There's a lot of them to cover. We're covering each one, so let's get on to it. First up, we have the first Legion, the Dark Angels. Dreadwing makes Plasma Fire, mainly, -1 Strength, which is very useful, as massed plasma guns can prove relatively effective against these guys, so it is useful. White Scars gives you +1 move, which is super good, as the Leviathan is quite slow, as we mentioned earlier. And Space Wolves gives you a +1 weapon skill on the charge, which is small, as you already hit on 5s. But the main thing is that you make your enemies, so especially veterans will feel this the most, they'll be hitting on 5s against you instead of hitting on 4s, and you'll be hitting on 3s against them, which is very good. Especially since veterans with Thunderhammers are some of the most effective ways to take out a Dreadnought, so being able to not only hit them more effectively, but make them hit you even worse is exceptional. So that is a very, very good Legion trait. And Imperial Fist gives you +1 to hit with your Storm Cannons, which is again redundant, but handy should you suffer some sort of hit roll debuff, which is hard for Dreadnoughts to do, but I figured it would be worth mentioning, as the Storm Cannon is an excellent weapon and counts as an auto gun, so it gets +1 to hit from the Imperial Fist's Legion trait. Out of these, I didn't think of too much else that would be too specific, but there may be things that I missed from Primarchs or characters, so leave those down below if I missed them. Moving on, we have the next set of Loyalist Legions. Starting off, we have the Iron Hands, which give you -1 to wound at shooting, which is fantastic. It makes las cannons and melta weapons, which are some of the best weapons against dreadnoughts, be a lot less effective. So obviously that is very good. Ultramarine, they of course have their 6-inch thing, where if you hit a unit, everyone within 6 inches hits that unit better. The Leviathan already hits on 2s, so he's perfect for setting off the buff. Whether he be using a Storm Cannon or even a melee unit, he could just fire off his Volkites to hit the enemy. And then whatever it is that you're targeting will of course get the buff, and whoever's nearby will also get the buff. Next up, we have Salamanders, which is just kind of worse Iron Hands, though it is still handy as it makes Melta Plasma and Volkite -1 to wound against you, and Flamers, but they're not very effective against them already. Next up, we have Raven Guard, which gives you rerolling 1s to wound when you charge, which is crazy. You already wound infantry on 2s, and wounding dreads on 3s is still massive and has a lot of value with the rerolls. Again, wounding on 3s and rerolling 1s is very, very consistent. And as I mentioned, you're basically getting full wound rerolls against infantry, so Terminators, Legion, any veterans, of course, will be getting instant death and wounded practically all the time, which is just great, isn't it? Moving on, we have another batch of Legions. Though, of course, we are moving into some of the traitor ones, though we're ending with the Blood Angels, of course. The Blood Angels get +1 to wound, which is very useful in dread-to-dread combat, though meaningless against most other targets, which, again, is not a bad thing, because dreads are some of the most terrifying units in the game, so having a unit that rips them apart very easily is very good. Emperor's Children gives you +1 initiative on the charge, which is absolutely excellent. Very little wants to be in combat with a dread already, but often units will have their initiative be the same, so they get to strike at the same time, but if you strike first, that unit's going to be dead before they strike, usually. Iron Warriors gives you +1 strength when shooting dreads and automata, so having strength 9 on your meltas or strength 8 on your Leviathan your Storm Cannons is excellent, because they're already weapons that are so good at popping vehicles. And Night Lords, there's not much specific, as dreads will always be outnumbered. They don't count as any more than one model, and they can't... and nothing you can pin needs the +1 to wound, so slightly redundant. However, Dreadnoughts are insanely good, so it doesn't really matter if they don't benefit from your Legion trait, as they're still really good. You don't have to worry too much about the fact that you won't be getting your Legion bonus from the Night Lords. You can still bring their really cool custom Leviathan. Next up, we have the next batch of Legions. World Eaters first, +1 attack is great, because you're such a nasty melee unit as it is, so having an extra attack is great. Slightly overkill sometimes, but it is useful just to avoid being bogged down too much. Death Guard, not much here for the Leviathan himself, as he can already move through terrain without issue, and he can't be pinned, so slowing him is pretty hard to do. Though still an excellent unit, much like the Night Lords, as I already mentioned. And Thousand Suns is much the same, as they don't get any Prosperine Arcana, so there's nothing that they really get that specific here. Again, if I'm missing anything from Primarchs, let me know down below. I don't know all the Primarchs rules by heart, so until then I will be leaving most of them out of this. Sons of Horus is another great Legion, but their Thunderhammer, their debuff is really good. It's -1 strength from melee weapons, and Thunderhammers are some of the best weapons, same with Power Fists, for pulling dreads apart. But this trait makes them -1 strength, which reduces their effect really quite a lot. And it's when you're charged or charged, so Thunderhammer's Power Fists become a lot less effective against Dreadnoughts, which is very good, because those are some of the best weapons against them to begin with. Next up, we have to cover the last set of Legion, which is only 2. The Word Bearers come up, which is not the most impactful. Winning combats is very easy for Dreadnoughts, but guaranteeing you win it by 1 wound is very handy. It's the same reason Vexillas can be good on melee units. Even though you're probably going to win, it can always be useful to just make sure of it. And the Alpha Legion, of course, means you count as 2 inches further away from all enemy units, whether they're charging or shooting at you. So very good, because melt weapons would need to get a lot closer to get into armor bane range, and need to get closer in general to shoot you, which means it's easier for you to countercharge them. And while I wanted to leave the Primarchs out of this, I want to note Alfarius can give these units Infiltrate, which is insane, or Deep Strike, which is also insane. Deep Striking, of course, has its benefits and downsides, as does Infiltrate, but just know, this can be one of the scariest things to face on the tabletop. I know, because I've done it, and I've faced it before. It is very scary and very fun to pull on your opponent, as cruel as it may be. However, that wraps up our coverage of the legions. Even though I mentioned a few of them don't get anything specific, I mentioned as well, the Leviathan Dreadnought is one of the best data sheets in the game, so even though you may not be getting a legion benefit, don't feel discouraged. This guy will still annihilate most things in the game without breaking a sweat. Next up, we want to talk about competitors, and there's really only one that comes to mind, and that would be the Contemptors. So the Contemptors are a little faster, a little less tough, but a little faster, and a little less deadly. But they also have better options as a ranged unit, and in truth, the two are not competing. The two happily coexist. They don't take up the same force organization slot. Contemptors are elites, Leviathans are heavy support. And honestly, the two make excellent partners in crime, working together in such a horrifically effective way that your opponent's life will become hell for the next 2 hours as they struggle to deal with your dreadnoughts. Whether it be they just run forward together as a melee duo, or you have your Leviathan acting as a super durable frontline to soak up any melee units before they get to your ranged Contemptor, while the ranged Contemptor takes out things with, say, dual las cannons. You have a very powerful dynamic duo. And the two, well, yes, they're both dreadnoughts. They really aren't competitors so much as they are best friends. Because where the Contemptor lags, the Leviathan excels, and where the Leviathan lags, the Contemptor excels. Again, so technically competitors, as they're both dreadnoughts, but are they really competitors when they work together all the time? It's like, two brands working together. Sure, they're technically competing for market space, but they're both more than happy to coexist because they both make billions of dollars. Bit of a strange analogy, I know, but I'm sure you understand what I'm saying, and I now realize I've been rambling. But regardless, that brings us to the end of our competition section. I'm sure there's other ones, but I wanted to keep it in the Dreadnought category, just because, well, he's a Dreadnought. He's the thing; those are the things directly competing with him. And the Deredeo certainly isn't competing. He's a ranged unit, though also a very good unit, even though I don't like Deredeos. Moving on, we have our best use section, which is where I give my general thoughts, and the Leviathans are very fitting to their lore. They're huge, durable, and scary, that want to run at the enemy very quickly. And the great thing is, any loadout works. You can go mixed with, say, a Storm Cannon, Melt-A-Weapon, and a melee weapon, double Storm Cannon for a very effective general-purpose unit, or just full-on Berserker with, a Kalana drill to destroy anything in the game in melee. As I mentioned, his mobility might seem slow, but again, thanks to him being a Dreadnought and move through cover, it's really hard for him to be slowed down by any means. Anything he gets to grip with, he will rip to shreds in an instant, whether it be a knight or a tank. Hordes could give him trouble, but the thing is, he has his chest weapons, which whether they're Volkite or Flamers, excel, and the Phosphex Discharger just annihilates infantry. Anything under that blast plate is probably going to die. So, while his initiative is merely okay, it's just standard, most weapons that are effective against him, i.e. Thunderhammers and Power Fists, are unwieldy, so they'll be hitting at initiative 1. So say a big unit of Cataphracti charge into him, he kills 6 of them before they get to strike, and then they have only a few models left to hit back. Truth be told, Dreadnoughts are so overwhelmingly powerful to the point of being almost perfect units. He can destroy anything. He can tank an insane amount of fire. So a good rule of thumb, so you don't lose your gaming group, is keep it to 1 Dreadnought per 1,000 points of your game. But here's the thing. 1 Dreadnought is more than enough to rip apart multiple chunks of an army. So build this guy however you want, have him run at your enemy, and laugh as every single weapon he throws at him fails to kill him before he's already killed dozens of his Marines. And should they actually kill him, chances are they dedicated so much firepower that the entire rest of your army is completely safe. So they just get to open fire at the entire enemy army and destroy them regardless. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to let me know what you thought down below. Did I miss any Primarch synergies? And I will see you all next time. Bye-bye. The Deredeo was an offshoot of the Contemptor Dreadnought, focusing it more so on heavy fire support rather than being a mixed-role customizable unit. The Deredeo packs some of the most mighty ranged weapons that the Space Marines have to offer on the durable and flexible chassis of the Dreadnought. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Deredeo Dreadnought Talon, a model I have been rather critical of, but I'm not going to let that interfere my thoughts of the unit. The Deredeo Dreadnought comes in at 205 points. It is 7 inches of movement, its weapon skill 5 and ballistic skill 5, toughness and strength 7, wounds 6, initiative 4, 2 attacks, leadership 9, and save 2+. So, fairly standard Dreadnought stats. The only difference is it has slightly less attacks than your Contemptors. In terms of the unit composition, it's just one Deredeo Dreadnought, which is heavy and a Dreadnought, so it cannot run, but it also rerolls saves against template weapons. In terms of war gear, the Anvilus autocannon battery is 48-inch range, strength 7, AP 4, heavy 4+, rendering 5+, sunder, and twin-linked. Sunder, of course, lets you roll an additional armor penetration dice and save it. Rending 5+ means against things with wounds you get AP 2 on a 5+ to wound, and against vehicles on an armor pen of 5+, you get to roll an extra D3. Twin-linked lets you reroll your hit rolls. Twin-linked Heavy Bolter is a twin-linked Heavy Bolter with 36-inch range, strength 5, AP 4, and heavy 4. The Atomantic Deflector is a 5+ invulnerable save, and also changes instant death to deal D3 wounds. And when this model dies, all models, both friendly and enemy, within D6 take an automatic strength 8 AP- hit. It has 4 Boreas air defense missiles, which are 48-inch range, strength 8, AP 2, heavy 1, Skyfire, guided fire, and one-shot. Guided fire allows this to shoot without line of sight. Skyfire means that it can shoot at flyers with its normal ballistic skill, but must make snapshots at everything else. One shot means you can only shoot each of them once, and heavy 1 is heavy 1. Helical Targeting Array is something you can activate at the start of any turn or battle round, for that matter, and it allows you to, you can't move, you can only intercept or overwatch on reaction, you ignore shrouded saves, and all weapons can gain Skyfire, and you can use intercept for free, which is very handy. Though, of course, you want to use this once you've reached your positioning. Once you do, there's not really a reason to not use it, as it allows you to just be a more effective gun turret. In terms of special rules, it has Legionis Astartes X, which is standard, so it can benefit from any of the legions. It has Dreadnought Talon. When this unit is deployed, all the models must be in unit coherency, but afterwards each operate independently and are not treated as a unit, because you can bring multiple in each 4-sword slot. Being a Dreadnought means it is fearless, it can move and shoot heavy ordnance weapons if it were stationary, and it can charge afterwards, not that this unit would want to charge. No unit without the Dreadnought keyword can join a Dreadnought unit. Successful Fleshbane and Poison wounds must be re-rolled, and you can shoot everything when you're shooting, including as part of reactions. So overall, for 205 points, this guy is pretty darn tough, and even just that Anvilus autocannon battery is very savage against medium and light vehicles and infantry. However, where it really gets interesting is its other weapon options, which we will get to in just a moment. But as you can see, it's fairly standard. With your targeting array, it wants you to sort of stance up in an area on a line of sight and just start firing at enemies. In terms of options, the unit may include one additional Deredeo Dreadnought at 205 points. Then, any Legion Deredeo Dreadnought in the unit may replace its Anvilus autocannons with one of the following: either a Hellfire Plasma Cannonade at 15 points each, mirroring 40k, this actually has 2 profiles. The Sustained Fire mode is 36-inch range, strength 7, AP 4, heavy 6, and breaching 4+, so effectively a many-shot standard plasma gun at longer range. Or you can swap into Maximal Fire mode, where things get very spicy. It's 36-inch range with strength 8, so it's instant deathing most Marines. It's AP 4 as well, but being heavy 1 and rending 4+ means that against units with wounds, it goes to AP 2 on every wound roll of a 4+, as well as also getting, as I mentioned, an extra D3 strength when you're armor penning. It does have Gets Hot, so he can take some damage, but with a large blast 5 inches, this is one of the most savage weapons in the game for killing Terminators or Space Marines in any kind of power armor. On its normal mode, it's still very good at dealing with them, Though, when you need to hit a vehicle, or if you just want to make sure those units die, it's hard to go wrong with the maximal fire mode. Do keep in mind, the sustained fire has breaching, which changes your AP to 2, but does nothing against vehicles, and the maximal fire has rending, which also changes it to AP 2 against infantry when you roll 4+, but also, again, gives you a D3 extra armor pen on penetration rolls of a 4+, which is very good. And then the Arachnus Heavy Las Cannon is 48-inch range, strength 10, AP 2, heavy 2, sunder, exoshock 5+, and twin linked. That comes in at plus 20 points. And the Volkite Falconet is 45-inch range, strength 7, AP 5, heavy 8, deflagrate, twin linked, pinning, and twin linked. I put twin linked twice, just so you know. So the Arachnus Heavy Las Cannon is an excellent anti-tank weapon. Sunder, of course, allows you to roll 2 armor pen dice and keep whichever one you want. Exoshock 5+ means that after you get a penetrating hit, roll a d6, and on a 5+, you get another one. And Twin Linked rerolls your hit rolls, of course. This thing is one of the most savage anti-tank guns in the game. With just strength 10 on its own, it's very good, but of course having Sunder just means it's very consistent, and Exoshock allows it to blow up a lot of vehicles easily, and it is a superior AP weapon, so you get +1 to your damage table rolls. Any Legion Deredeo may take a Heavy Flamer, no point, this guy doesn't want to be close to enemies anyways, and the Deredeo may exchange its 4 Borealis missiles, or Boreas missiles, for Alos missile launcher, which is 60-inch range, strength 6, AP 3, heavy 3, pinning, and guided fire. So this thing can shoot out of line of sight. You can't split fire with a Dreadnought, unfortunately, but this is still useful. If there's nothing valuable to shoot out, you could just hit someone with a pinning test. And this thing is pretty good at killing Marines at the very least, and that does cost an extra 5 points over the 4 Boreas missiles, and I'd say is generally worth taking. Of course, if you like the Boreas missiles, though, by all means take them, as there's not that much in it. Moving on, we have the buffing section, which is pretty small. I only really wanted to mention the Tech Marine, as I feel like Iron Fathers need to be moving up the board to make the most of themselves. Tech Marines can heal Dreadnoughts on a 5+ in the shooting phase, and given the Deredeo's playstyle of just kind of stancing up in an area and lighting up enemies, it's very easy for the Tech Marine to just stand nearby. Maybe attach him to something like a heavy or tactical support squad, packing a weapon that's complementary. For example, you could bring a Las Cannon Heavy Support Squad along with a Plasma Cannon Deredeo for something that can really destroy both infantry and vehicles with no issue, even though the Plasma Cannon on maximal fire still does quite a lot of damage to vehicles very consistently. But of course, still, having something like that would be useful. Though, again, I think this is not at all necessary. Tech Marines do have a lot of good value, and if there's one nearby and he can heal it, why not? But I wouldn't just use your Tech Marine for that. That's a waste of a very good minor support character. Anyways, it's time to move on to the 18 legions, so let's get into that. First up, we of course have the First Legion, the Dark Angels. Dreadwing means your plasma, flamers, and things like that are -1 strength against you, which is nice, so you are toughness 7. Iron Wing is also nice. It gives you reroll 1s against vehicles, which is nice for the non-twin linked weapons, which is only the Hellfire Plasma Cannonade, but is still useful. White Scars gives you +1 movement, is nice when you need to get into position on its first movement phase. Space Wolves, this guy sucks in melee, and if he is in melee, he can't shoot, he doesn't want to be there, but for a melee force, this is one of the best firepower pieces to back them up. Imperial Fists give you +1 to hit if you're using your autocannons, which is niche as you already hit on 2s, though that is very useful should you face some sort of ballistic skill debuff. Blood Angels are the same deal as the Space Wolves. It's not a melee unit, but can support your melee units exceptionally well. Out of these First Legions, I'd say easily the Dark Angels have it the best, just because having more durability on an already durable platform is really, really good. But this unit is like most Dreadnoughts, good in every Legion, even if he doesn't explicitly benefit from being in said Legion. But with that, it's time to move on to the next batch of our Legion run-through. That is quite long. It is the next set of Loyalist Legions that we'll be covering, of course, as we're going effectively in order, starting with the Loyalists and moving to Traitors. Iron Hands mean you're -1 to wound when you're getting shot at, which is fantastic. Makes las cannons much less effective, plasma guns way less effective, and melt weapons do get a nice debuff as well. For the Ultramarines, the Deredeo already hits on 2, so he doesn't really need it, but he does have a very big base and is also, of course, very accurate, so it's easy for him to activate with Value of Wisdom, I believe the rule is called, to give everyone nearby +1 to hit the same target. Salamanders is just kind of a worse version of Iron Hands, though I'll still say is an exceptional rule, as it makes Meltas, Plasmas, and Volkites -1 to wound, and since the Deredeo is toughness 7, Plasma Guns would be pretty effective against him, so it's nice to have those be -1 to wound. Raven Guard is melee, mainly. It gives you rerolling 1s to wound when you charge. This guy doesn't want to charge, and will only be in melee if he's forced to be there by an enemy unit. So if things are like that, they're already going bad, and that little buff is not going to help his 2 attacks. So again, like the Blood Angels, a great fire support piece for a bunch of screaming Raven Guard flying through the air, but not so much for the special rule of the Legion itself. Moving on, we have to cover our next brick. That would, of course, start with the Emperor's Children, which, much like the other melee chapters, +1 initiative on the charge is not what this guy wants to be doing. Same as the other melee legions. Iron Warriors gives you +1 to strength when you're shooting dreads, automatas, or vehicles, and fortifications. This is very good and makes this thing an excellent anti-tank unit to a godly anti-tank unit. That brings those las cannons to strength 11. That brings your plasma gun to strength 9. Even your autocannon up to strength 8. That is a big bonus. It makes you much better at destroying vehicles, especially with the rending weapons, because then it's easier for you to get penetrating hits. Night Lords are a very melee-focused legion, but if you bring the Alos, missile launcher, he has, guided fire pinning, which could be useful to just fire those off at someone in the distance to try and pin them before a unit charges them. But again, exceptional unit, nothing specific for the Night Lords that help this guy. Again, not a bad thing. I just want to list everyone and just be equal with all the legions. But again, Iron Warriors are definitely the standout out of these 3. I'm sure you're not surprised by that, but strength 8 autocannon is crazy. Strength 9 plasma gun is crazy. Strength 8 regular plasma mode is insane. Anyways, moving on, we have the World Eaters. You get the idea. Melee. It's a melee legion. Death Guard, so this guy doesn't have move through cover like the Leviathan, so it is pretty handy to avoid being slowed down by that. Though, again, it's a Dreadnought, so it's not going to be getting pinned or anything like that, but it is still nice. Makes it very easy for it to deploy somewhere safe and then shimmy out on its first movement phase without being slowed down. Thousand Suns, these guys don't get Prospering Arcana, so similar to the melee detachments, or melee legions, even though I'd say Thousand Suns aren't a dedicated melee army. It's just the same sort of effect. Sons of Horus is exceptional, because one of the most effective weapons against dreads are Thunderhammers. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. They're brutal 2 and strength 8, so making them strength 7 is a nice way to just skirt as much of that damage as possible. So the Word Bearers are a melee legion, and they're already fearless, so even though they could count as winning, it doesn't matter because they can't fail the morale check to fall back anyways. So again, Word Bearers, World Eaters, Blood Angels, all those things. This unit is still excellent in all those just because its base sheet is so excellent. So just keep that in mind. Even if they don't benefit, they're still very, very good in these legions. Moving on into the last of our, at least I almost forgot, my favorite legion, Alpha Legion. So Alpha Legion, of course, treats you as 2 inches further away from your enemies, which is mainly good for things like Melta weapons, so they have to get a lot closer to get into Melta range to reroll those wounds, which is very nice. It also makes things like, plasma guns, they have to get a little closer to get into rapid fire, and so on and so forth. It's just handy. And Smoke of Mirrors is a very good advanced reaction. I'm not 100% familiar with all of them, but I do know Smoke and Mirrors, and if someone with a bunch of Meltas gets very close, you could Smoke and Mirrors away, which would be very funny and very useful because you could save a super valuable unit like a Deredeo. And then next turn he could move out and likely blow up whatever was threatening him because Deredeos do crazy range damage. Moving on to the competition section, similar to the Leviathan Dreadnought that I already covered, these guys are, they work together very well. Contemptors are sort of the middle ground. They have great ranged options, great melee, and that's where they sort of, diverge. This guy's pure range. The Contemptor can do that, but he's also one of the nastier melee units in the game. For pure range damage output, like if you just need the damage output of shooting, the Deredeo does beat the Contemptor, in my opinion. But again, the two work great together. A Contemptor can act as a frontline attacker, or could bring something like, assault cannons or flamers to keep the enemies at bay that get too close, while this guy does the firing range, and the Leviathan Dreadnought is much the same, though the Leviathan does not have any long-range weapons. His longest range is 24 inches, or 30 from his Volkites, but he wants to be up close and fighting, so keep that in mind. He also works as a great frontline bodyguard for your Deredeos, so again, even though they're both Dreadnoughts, they work together great. And I will say, though, these guys in the Leviathan do compete a little bit more because they both take up heavy support slots, but most of the Marine tanks are kind of mediocre anyway, so you're likely to have a heavy support slot or two open. So bringing a unit of both, completely reasonable. Though there are some rights of war that would prevent you from doing that. The one that comes to mind is, of course, the Pride of the Legion. Heavy Support Squad does offer great firepower and is really its only direct competition in this section. But to come even close to the damage the Deredeo does, you need to put in a lot of points into that Heavy Support Squad, and they're super squishy. So they lose their points advantage, and they can't move and shoot. So therefore, the Deredeo, in my opinion, is much better. Moving on to the best use, the Deredeo is pretty simple, is the best way I can put it. I'd say he's the tamest of the three core heresy dreads, but that's kind of like being the weakest nuclear bomb, because you're still going to annihilate most things you shoot at. Its firepower is some of the most savage in the game. With the plasma guns, its general purpose, and just eats through things like Terminators and Marines for breakfast. The las cannons just render armor pointless. And my favorite is the plasma cannonade. It's just so good. It's just so exceptional. Though even if you just want to keep them dirt cheap, the autocannons are still really good. They function as just a cheaper version of the plasma cannon, but for pure armor penetration, you can't beat the las cannons. With those two shots, there's a solid enough chance you'll get an exo shock. With Sunder and all that, you of course just do an insane amount of penetrating hits. Of course, you're still banking on a 6 to explode the enemy, but even immobilizing or weapon destroying something is great. The Deredeo is not the most overwhelming of the dreads. Of course, I think that goes to the Leviathan and the Contemptor. But again, don't make a mistake of underestimating the Deredeo. Sure, it can't fight in combat, but it will destroy you at range before you even get close enough. Of course, I've gone the entire video praising the Deredeo, but for the last 30-odd seconds, I just have to admit, I hate the look of the thing. Which is a shame, because I really like its rules, but I just think it looks dumb. It's very squat and fat, and I know every time I mention this, people are like, what, how can you not like the Deredeo? But I've just never liked it. I think it's a dumb-looking dreadnought, and I wish it looked cooler, because honestly, I would love to have some Deredeos in my army. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think down below, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye. The Contemptor Dreadnought was designed during the Great Crusade, and for that era was the most powerful dreadnought available. It of course eventually branched off into the Deredeo and Leviathan dreadnoughts to be more specialized, but the Contemptor never lost its place in the Legionis Astartes. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to another video covering the Contemptor Dreadnought of the Legionis Astartes in the Horus Heresy. So the Contemptor Dreadnought, Talon, comes in at 175 points at base. The Contemptor has the sort of standard Dreadnought stat line. It moves 8 inches, so nice and speedy. Weapon skill and ballistic skill 5, so it's hitting on 2s at range and hitting on 3s most often in melee. It's strength 7, toughness 7, so very resilient. Weapon, it's 6 wounds, initiative 4, 3 attacks, leadership 9, and a 2+ save. The Contemptor Dreadnought unit is simply composed of one Contemptor Dreadnought. The war gear comes standard with a Gravis Power Fist within Combi Bolter. The Gravis Power Fist is Strength 9, AP 2, and Brutal 3, so that means for every attack you have to save 3 times. Combi Bolter is 24 inch range with Strength 4, AP 5, Rapid Fire, and Twin Linked. The Twin Linked Gravis Bolt Cannon is of course Twin Linked, 36 inch range with Strength 5, AP 4, and Heavy 6, a decent enough weapon for killing things like Militia or Imperialis Solar Auxilia. The Automantic Deflector is of course a 5+ invulnerable save and converts any instant death to instead inflict D3 wounds. When this model dies, all models, both friendly and enemy within D6, take an automatic Strength 8 AP dash hit, so very useful as it keeps him very durable with that 2+5+ setup. In terms of special rules, he has Legionis Astartes X, so he benefits from your Legion rolls. Dreadnought Talon. When this unit is deployed, all models must be placed in unit coherency, but afterwards each operate independently and are not treated as a unit. And then it is a Dreadnought, so it is fearless, can move and shoot heavy weapons and ordnance, as well as charge afterwards, as if it counted as stationary. No unit without the Dreadnought keyword can ever join this unit, and weapons with the Fleshbane and Poisoned rule must reroll successful wound rolls against them, so they are very inefficient for the most part. It can shoot everything when it is shooting, as well as including during reactions, though do keep in mind it cannot split its weapons to multiple targets, so keep that in mind when equipping this thing, which we'll cover in just a moment. Just for 175 points, this is an exceptional loadout and base stat line, as it's just a very tough, very fast unit that's fearless, which is just great in general. So, of course, for 175 points, it really doesn't get much better than this, just given how efficient it is and how fast it is, along with almost being impossible to slow down outside of difficult terrain. Very few weapons will destroy these efficiently, so you have to keep that in mind. Moving on, we have to cover the options. So, the unit may include up to 2 additional Contemptor Dreadnoughts for 175 points each, and then any Legion Contemptor may swap its Gravis Bolt Cannon or Gravis Power Fist and Combi Bolter with one of the following: either another Gravis Bolt Cannon for free, which is the same as the one on the last sheet. The Gravis Melta Cannon is 24-inch range with Strength 8, AP 1, Heavy 2, Armor Bane Melta, twin linked, and it's 5 points each. Heavy 2 means, AP 1 means it's superior armor penetrating, so +2 on damage rolls. Armor Bane means you, of course, get 2 armor penetration or reroll wounds against Dreadnoughts, and Twin Link means you reroll your hit rolls. Gravis Autocannon is 48-inch range with Strength 7, AP 4, Heavy 3, Rending 6+, and Twin Linked. Rending 6+, of course, means on a wound roll of a 6, you get AP 2, or against vehicles, you get a D3 Strength bonus to your piercing. The Gravis Plasma Cannon is 36-inch range with Strength 7, AP 4, Heavy 1, Large Blast 5 inches, Breaching 4+, and Gets Hot. Gets Hot means on a 1 you may suffer a wound. Breaching 4+ means, of course, on a 4+ to wound you get AP 2. Large Blast 5 means use the 5-inch blast marker. The Conversion Beam Cannon is 20 points and has a few profiles. Up to 18-inch range, it's just Strength 7, AP Dash. Heavy 1, Blast 3 inches, and Blind. Blind means that enemies must take an initiative test or they fight and shoot at Weapon Skill and Ballistic Skill 1. And then from 18 to 42-inch range, it bumps to Strength 9, AP 4. And then from 42 to 72, it jumps all the way to Strength 12 and AP 1, making it an excellent anti-tank weapon. The Volkite Dual Culverin is 45-inch range with Strength 6, AP 5, Heavy 6, Deflagrate, and Twin Linked. Deflagrate means for any unsaved wound, you get to roll another wound, and Twin Linked means you reroll hit rolls, and that's 15 points each, so pretty pricey. The Kara's Assault Cannon is 24-inch range with Strength 6, AP 4, Heavy 6, and Rending 6+, for 15 points. Solid enough anti-horde. Gravis Las Cannon is 48-inch range, Strength 9, AP 2, Heavy 2, and Sunder, and that comes in at 20 points. The Gravis Power Fist with Inbolt Combi Bolter is free, and the Gravis Power Fist is the same as the last one. The Chain Fist and Inbolt Combi Bolter, though, of course, is a different weapon. The Chain Fist itself is Strength 10, AP 2, Armor Bane Melee, and Murderous Strikes 5+. This is, of course, mainly for destroying tanks, but with Murderous Strikes, it does also do good work against other Dreadnoughts. To make up for its lack of Brutal, of course, it is rerolling wounds, and Murderous Strike means of the inflicting D3 damage for every 5+ against Dreadnoughts, as well as getting instant death on infantry, but since you're Strength 10, you'll be instant deathing most infantry anyways, so there's really not too much benefit there. In terms of loadout, though, most of these weapons are very good. Blind is an excellent special rule from the Conversion Beam Cannons, Melta Cannons are excellent for only 5 points, and the Chain Fist is an excellent melee weapon if you want to go full-on Brawler build, which I think is completely reasonable given how this thing moves at 8 inches per turn. It's very fast and it can't be pinned, which is very useful. There is a lack of pinning weapons, but that's not a big deal. There is one more sheet of options. Any Legion Contemptor Dreadnought in the unit may replace its inbuilt Combi Bolter with one of the following: either a Heavy Flamer, which is Template, Strength 5, AP 4, and 5 points each. Then the Plasma Blaster is 18 inches, Strength 7, AP 4, Assault 2, Breaching 4+, and Gets Hot. The inbuilt Graviton Gun uses the Graviton Pulse as its strength characteristic, as you will. It has Concussive 1, which means that you can reduce enemies' initiative. And Haywire means that you get to inflict extra damage against vehicles, effectively. This comes in at 15 points, and Graviton Pulse means on a d6, enemies must roll under their strength on a d6, or they suffer a wound. The Graviton Gun is simply just too expensive. Will do very little and is useless against vehicles, which makes Haywire a little strange. Inbuilt Melta gun is of course 12-inch range, strength 8, AP 1, assault 1, and armor bane Melta for 15 points, very solid. And any Contemptor may take one of the following, either a Havoc launcher, which is a top-mounted rocket launcher. It's 48-inch range, strength 5, AP 5, heavy 1, blast 3 inches, and twin-linked. For 10 points, this is a fine little extra flurry of attacks, especially good if you're going for an infantry-killing type build. The Helical Targeting Array is 10 points. You can activate it at the start of any of your turns or at the start of the battle if you're going second, and if you do until the end of the next turn, the model may not move, run, or use any reactions other than an Intercept or Overwatch. The controlling player may choose to use the Skyfire special rule, which allows you to use your normal weapon skill or ballistic skill when shooting planes. No model may take a Shrouded damage mitigation roll if you're being attacked by this unit, and this model may use the Interception reaction for free. This does not take a point from your reaction allotment, and does not allow this model to make more than one reaction, but does allow you to bypass the 3 reactions per phase restriction. A Legion Contemptor Talon of no more than one model may take a Dreadnought drop pod as a dedicated transport, doesn't take a Force Sword slot, but does count as an elite for all other rules purposes. Of course, I'd say the best weapons for your fists are the Melta guns, with the Plasma Blasters in a close second, though you could always just keep it cheap with Combi Bolters. I'd say it's worth the upgrade. I'd say either the Helical Targeting Array or Havoc Launcher are both maybes. If you're going for a turret build with, say, las cannons, then the Helical Targeting Array has its uses. Though at that point you're getting to a cost where you could just bring a Deredeo instead, which is, of course, a better shooting unit. However, it still has its uses, and the Havoc Launcher is decent enough shooting. Moving on to buff options, the Tech Marine is the main one. He can heal your Dreadnought on a 5+, and given the Contemptor's general nature, being able to be built into anything, it's not unlikely that a Tech Marine could stance up next to a shooting Contemptor and keep it healed, though I'd say it's not necessary, as the Tech Marine can do a lot more than just that. I do also need to mention Rites of War. So Rites of War are something you can only get access to with basically having a certain rule in your list, and one of them is March of the Ancients. This is your Dreadnought Rite of War, and I will just come out right and say this is one of the most hated things in the Horus Heresy. If you play this, there is a very solid chance people won't want to play with you, but I can't not mention it in this video. This allows you to upgrade a single Talon of Contemptor Dreadnoughts with just one model to a character, and he becomes your Warlord for 30 points. And then you get to take 2 Contemptor Talons as your compulsory troop slots, and they get line. So you have your 6 Dreadnoughts with line and 1 Dreadnought who's a boosted character. This, of course, is crazy because Contemptor Dreadnoughts are already some of the best units in the game, so giving them line is simply insane, and having them fill out your compulsory troop slots is also insane. This basically takes them from just the best in almost every category to basically the best in every category. It lets you just spam an insane amount of Dreadnoughts. But since Dreadnoughts are just overpowered, I'll say it, I would not recommend using this. Unless you and your friend want to just smash like March of the Ancients versus March of the Ancients, 2 Dreadnought armies running into each other, that's cool. But if you're just having a casual game, I generally wouldn't bring this. It is very unfun to play against and just generally heinous to run. That about wraps my piece on March of the Ancients. Just keep that in mind before you go and have your, 25 Dreadnought list to make your opponent's life a living nightmare. Anyways, enough about that. Let's move on to our, of course, everyone's favorite section of the video, covering all 18 legions. Yippee! I'm being overly negative. I don't mind covering all the legions. Anyways, let's start off with the loyalists, and of course, first up is the First Legion, the Dark Angels. Dreadwing means you're -1 to wound effectively by like plasma guns and things like that. Iron Wing gives you reroll 1s when targeting vehicles, which is nice if your weapons aren't twin-linked. White Scars gives you +1 to move, is excellent no matter what loadout you're running. Space Wolves gives you +1 weapon skill on the charge, which is mainly useful in making your opponents, like veterans, much worse at fighting Dreadnoughts, which is good because veterans with Thunder Hammers are some of the most deadly units when it comes to dealing with Dreadnoughts, as of course they're brutal 2, they're strength 8, so they would crack your head open very quickly. But meaning they hit on 5s instead of on 4s is very nice, and you'll be hitting on 3s, so you'll crush more veterans before they get to attack you. The Imperial Fists give you +1 to hit with some of the ranged weapons, like the Bolters and the Assault Cannon and your Autocannon, which is niche but handy when it pops up. And the Blood Angels give you +1 to wound on the charge, which is mainly useful against Dreadnoughts, as you wound most infantry on 2, but that on 2s, but that is still very useful, as Dreadnought v Dreadnought is something that will happen frequently, and having a unit that is just better at destroying Dreadnoughts is very good, and means you will often win that duel. Even though, again, it's really only useful if your opponent is also bringing Dreadnoughts, which chances are they are, because everyone likes Dreadnoughts. They're really cool, and that's why I'm covering all of them. Next up, we have the next batch of Legions. The Iron Hands gives you -1 to wound when you're being shot at. Very useful, as las cannons can kill Dreadnoughts relatively effectively. Melta weapons also don't appreciate the debuff to their strength. Ultramarines is, of course, when you shoot, units nearby get +1 to hit when shooting the same thing. Contemptor's already hit on 2s, so it's a great way to set off that. And even if you're running a melee build, you can just shoot your combi bolters at something to buff a nearby unit, which is very useful. Salamanders mean you're -1 to wound against things like Plasma, Volkite, you are -1 to wound from Meltas, Plasmas, Volkites, and Flamers, which is exceptional as the Contemptor is T7, so that makes Meltas less effective, Plasmas a lot less effective, and Volkites almost useless. Raven Guard gives you rerolling 1s to wound. It's great, as in most targets you'll be wounding on 2s in melee anyways, and even the units you're wounding on 3s, like Dreadnoughts, rerolling 1s is still exceptional. It means you are going to be converting most of your hits into wounds. As it is, it's a very, very solid special rule. Raven Guard are a very solid Legion in my mind, even though I don't play them. I think they're very cool and very fun. Anyways, sorry, going on a little Raven Guard tangent. Maybe it's because I like to steal things from them as the Alpha Legion. Next up, we have the next batch of Legions, which starts us off with the Emperor's Children on the Trader's End, which gives you +1 to initiative on the charge, which is excellent. It can really help stop things like mass rending weapons from being effective by clobbering enemies before they strike, as you'll be at initiative 5, and most enemies will be at initiative 4. Or even initiative 5 things like Power Lances would get hit pretty hard by this. The Iron Warriors gives you +1 to strength when shooting dreads, which is really nice for all of your weapons. And if you build it with such things like las cannons or melta cannons, you'll really appreciate it, because then you'll just be better at piercing armor. The Night Lords give you +1 to wound if you outnumber a target or if they're falling back or pinned, which is a little difficult for a Dreadnought to do. A unit falling back isn't unlikely, but he may want to just go fight something else. But if you're running Night Lords, you're probably bringing a lot of pinning units anyways, and he already wounds most things on 2s, and the things he doesn't can't be pinned anyways, so he doesn't really benefit from this that much. But again, the Contemptor is still an excellent unit. And I'm sure the Night Lords would appreciate having something this beefy with them. And of course, an extra model means another model that can help a squad outnumber some enemies. If it's like a big unit of Contakar, why not just drive that point home with a Contemptor Dreadnought, just to make sure you outnumber them. Next up, we have the next batch of Trader Legions, starting off with the World Eaters, who give you +1 attack, which is great because the Contemptor's melee weapons are all fantastic. I say all. Both of his melee weapons are fantastic. Of course, Chain Fists or Power Fists just really appreciate having the extra attack. That's usually going to mean an extra Dead Terminator or an extra whole point destroyed. Next up, we have Death Guard, which means you basically get to move for free so long as you're in your deployment zone. It means you get to deploy very safely, and then you can just run through things like dangerous terrain and get into the fight just as fast. It's very nice. The Thousand Suns, you don't gain Prosperine Arcana, so not much specific here either, though there is a Thousand Suns specific Contemptor Dreadnought, that was a very long sentence, called the Osiren, which is something that I would need to cover on its own. The Sons of Horus is very nice because you get -1 strength when you're in combat from enemies, so things like Thunderhammers go from wounding you on 3s and to wounding you on 4s, which is very nice. The Word Bearers, I'd say, is pretty mediocre. Dreads can't fail morale, so they're not running, but winning combats by 1 wound is useful, I'd say, even if it is pretty niche, because Dreadnoughts will usually be the ones winning combat anyways, but I just don't think the Word Bearers Legion trait is that useful. Maybe I just haven't seen the light of the Word Bearers, so if I'm wrong, tell me down below. And finally, we have the last Legion, the Alpha Legion, of course, my personal Legion. Forcing people to get closer to be in melee, to get into Melta range is great, because it means it's easier for you to get into melee. And a funny bit of cheese, actually, if you're playing in March of the Ancients, and you really just want to rub that point home, you actually can give your Warlord Contemptor a Power Dagger, as it just keys off character, which he's a character, because he gets upgraded to one, so you can give him a Power Dagger, which is really nice on mixed loadouts, because you'll still get your +1 attack, and is a pretty funny visual to model on your Dreadnought. Where would he put the knife? Would it be a bayonet, or would he have it like under his fist, or maybe on a knee pad or something? I don't know. That's for you to decide. But it is funny to do, even if, again, I don't recommend using March of the Ancients. It's not very fun, so don't do that. Well, it's fun for you. It's not fun for your opponent, so don't do it. Moving on, we have to cover the competition, which I've covered for the most part. The Deredeo and the Leviathan both share pretty much the same thing, just reversed. If you want pure melee muscle, then the Leviathan is pretty hard to beat with its slightly superior melee weapons. And if you want pure shooting, the Deredeo outcompetes it, in my opinion. But the thing is, the Contemptor still does those things exceptionally and can do both of them at the same time. Because you could give it like a melta cannon, which makes it excellent ranged anti-firepower or anti-tank firepower, and then a power fist, which makes it great at crunching up things like Terminators. Or you could go, with conversion beamers, which allows it to be a pseudo-buffing unit in a way by blinding enemies. There's a lot that the Contemptor can do that these guys can't do, but if you're on the far end of the extremes, then it's hard to argue against the others. Mainly the Deredeo, because if you upgrade a Contemptor to have all the same firepower bonuses that a Deredeo does, the price is about the same, so you're kind of just better off getting a Deredeo at that point. The Leviathan costs significantly more, about 100 points more. So if you need just melee on the budget, this guy does that exceptionally. But it does make sense why the Leviathan costs so much more. He's got more wounds, more toughness. Though a little slower, but he's harder to slow down. Regardless, all of these units are exceptional, and you can run them in concert to have a very effective fighting force. Contemptor can be your generalist, your Leviathan can be your melee, and your Deredeo can have the biggest guns to blow things up from across the board to make a very effective triangle offensive, if you will. Each side representing a different part of your battle plan, which is definitely something you could do, but maybe don't spam them, because, again, Dreadnoughts are very scary and can be very unfun to play against. So just keep that in mind. Anyways, we're done with the competition section. It's time to go on to our best use section. And the Contemptor is sort of the typifying Dreadnought of, how insane Dreadnoughts are. It has excellent durability, speed, and damage. Pretty much all of its weapons are good, and even just its basic melee, shooting combo isn't bad by any means. If you can gear it up for anything. If you want more horde clearing, plasma cannons are great for that. If you want to clear things like militia, then bolt cannons or assault cannons are good. The auto cannon's a good general purpose weapon. Las cannon's a very solid anti-tank. The melta cannon is excellent. For only 5 points, it's one of the better anti-tank weapons, in my opinion. And honestly, if you have 2 melta cannons and you jump out of a drop pod, that's an excellent little way to really blow up your opponent. And even covering the other ones, the conversion beamers, blind is one of the best special rules in the game, in my opinion. And in your fists, whether it's plasmas, bolters, or melta, I think they're all very good. Melta for softening up vehicles, plasma for blowing up space marines. Overall, there's really not much more I can say about the Contemptor. It does everything in the game, and it does everything in the game well. It doesn't have pinning, I guess, but when it can just blow up most infantry anyways, it doesn't really need pinning because there won't be any infantry left to pin. Its melee is exceptional. It can rip apart just about anything from a rhino to even Imperial Knights. They fight really well. They're just really exceptional. So just make sure to bring one, but just don't spam them, because again, masked up Dreads is just really unfun to play against, and that's my public service announcement. I've been Spoons Rattling. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. The Castraferrum dreadnought was in use during the Great Crusade and was thought to be phased out, but during the Horus heresy, of course, desperate times called for desperate measures, and the Castraferrums were put back into production and used again. Despite their more primitive design, they still proved to be formidable assets on the battlefield. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we're covering the Castraferrum dreadnought in Horus heresy, though I will just be calling it the box knot from here on out, or box dreadnought. So the Castraferrum dreadnought talon comes in at 125 points. It moves 6 inches, weapon skill and ballistic skill 5, strength 6 and toughness 6, with 5 wounds, initiative 2, 3 attacks, leadership 9, and 2+ save. So, for 50 points less than a Contemptor, you do get significantly worse stats. However, these stats are still quite good, except for the initiative, which is unusually bad. The unit count is just 1 dreadnought. It does have the heavy keyword, so it cannot run, and it rerolls saves against template weapons. In terms of war gear, it comes standard with the Gravis Power Fist with inbuilt Combi Bolter, which the Power Fist is strength 9, AP2, and brutal 3, same as the Contemptor, which is interesting. And the Combi Bolter itself is 24-inch range with strength 4, AP5, rapid fire, and twin linked, decent enough for squishing some militia or something like that. The twin linked Gravis Bolt Cannon is 36-inch range, strength 5, AP4, and heavy 6. It does have a ferromantic deflector, which is a slight downgrade from the antomantic deflector that most dreadnoughts have. It still has a 5+ invuln, so it is very tough, but instant death, instead of being converted into D3 wounds, inflicts 3 wounds to this model. And when this model dies, all models within D6 take an automatic strength 6 AP- hit. In terms of special rules, it has Legionis Astartes X, Dreadnought Talon, which means you deploy all of the dreadnoughts in a unit coherency at deployment, but from then on they are treated as different units. And as a dreadnought, it gains Fearless, so it'll never fail morale. It can move and shoot heavy weapons and charge afterwards. And also, it cannot be joined by anything that doesn't have the Dreadnought keyword. And successful Fleshbane and Poison models must be poison wounds must be rerolled, and it can shoot everything when shooting, including reactions. So for 125 points, this is honestly still a very beefy stat line despite its slightly diminutive initiative, which means it won't excel in melee against infantry. However, it still hits and shoots very accurately and is still very tough for the cost, which is very good, and is another way to get more dreadnoughts on the board, and of course I quite like the box knot, so I'm glad to see that it's actually pretty good in this game, in my opinion. Moving on, we have all the weapon options, which this guy does have a good amount of, and you can run this guy in the Mortis configuration with both of them, but the first thing is you can include up to 2 extra dreadnoughts for 125 points per model, of course. And then any of them may swap out their Gravis Bolt Cannon or Power Fist and Combi Bolter for any of the following. The Gravis Bolt Cannon is the same as what I said in the previous slide. The Multi-Melta is 24-inch range with Strength 8, AP1, Heavy 1, Armor Bane Melta, and Twin Linked, so very solid anti-tank, but for 20 points it's a little pricey. The Gravis Auto Cannon is 48-inch range, Strength 7, AP4, Heavy 3, Running 6+, Twin Linked, for 10 points each. The Gravis Plasma Cannon is 36-inch range, Strength 7, AP4, Heavy 1, Large Blast 5, Breaching 4+, and Gets Hot for 10 points. The Flamestorm Cannon is Strength 6, AP4, Heavy 1, Torrent 18 inches, and 15 points each. Torrent 18 means you get to place the narrow end of your template anywhere within 18 inches, and the only restriction is that the wide end of the template cannot end closer to the model than the narrow end. The Gravis Missile Launcher is 10 points, and it has 2 modes. Frag, which is 48-inch range, Strength 4, AP6, Heavy 1, Blast 5 inches, and Pinning. And the Crack profile is 48-inch range with Strength 8, AP3, and Heavy 2. The Gravis Las Cannon is 48-inch range, Strength 9, AP2, Heavy 2, and Sunder. And the Gravis Power Fist with Inbolt Combi Bolter is free, and I already explained that. And the Chain Fist does have the same Underslung Combi Bolter, but it is a slightly side-gridded profile to Strength 10, so very nice. AP2, Armor Bane Melee, Murder Strikes 5+, which means on a 5+, you get instant death, and Armor Bane, of course, means you roll 2 Armor Pen dice in melee. Then you can swap out either or any of your inbuilt combi bolters with either a heavy flamer or melt a gun, which the heavy flamer is template, strength 5, AP4 for 5 points, and the melt a gun is 12-inch range, strength 8, AP1, assault 1, and armor bane melta for 15 points, which means when you get close, you of course roll 2 armor pen dice. So these weapons are all pretty fairly priced in my opinion, though I think a standout is the Gravis Missile Launcher. It is significantly better than your standard missile launcher for a very similar price at that matter. Blast 5 inches is really good for pinning, because it means you're more likely to force that pinning test onto any target, and having 2 shots on your crack mode is actually pretty nice, which makes the rocket launcher less just sort of mediocre general purpose and upgrades it to actually good general purpose. The Las Cannon is also great, even though it is expensive at 20 points. Having Sunder on a big heavy 2 weapon is very good, it means you're more likely to pierce armor, and the classic missile and Las Cannon build is definitely one I would consider, but honestly, if you wanted to go double Gravis Missile Launcher, I'd understand, mainly because it looks funny, but also because the Gravis Missile Launcher is quite good. Some other standouts, in my opinion, are the Plasma Cannon or the Auto Cannon, which are both very general purpose, though I'd lean towards the Plasma Cannon personally, just for the easier access to breaching, which is very helpful for dealing with things like Terminators, though Gets Hot is unfortunate. Moving on, we have to cover the rest of the options. Any of them may take a Havoc Launcher, which is 48-inch range, Strength 5, AP5, Heavy 1, Blast 3, and Twin Linked. A fine enough upgrade if you just need some extra anti-infantry firepower. Or it can take a Helical Targeting Array, which means you can activate it at the start of any of your turns or start of the battle if you're going second. The model may not move or run or use any other reaction except Overwatch and Interceptor. Controlling player may choose to use Skyfire when using its weapons, so very good against planes. And no model may take a damage mitigation roll provided by Shrouded when attacked by this model, so you bypass Shrouded, which is effectively feel no pain. When this model uses the Interceptor reaction, it doesn't cost a point of your reaction allotment, and this does allow you to bypass the 3 reactions in a phase, but not more than 1 reaction per model. The Searchlight is 5 points, and it just allows you to ignore night fighting, and 1 model hit by your attacks is also, or 1 unit hit by your attacks is also revealed for all other friendly models, so they can ignore night fighting. Legion, one of the talons of 1 Dreadnought can take a Dreadnought drop pod as a designated transport. Doesn't take up a Force Org slot, though does count as an elite for all other rules purposes. This is something I wouldn't really consider, as I'd say the Castraferrum generally wants to either use its melee, which you can't charge out of a drop pod, and it's better off shooting at range with longer range weapons instead of trying to use something like multi-meltas, in my opinion. Moving on, we have to cover the section on all the legions. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. It's actually the buff options up next. Tech Marines can heal up Dreadnoughts on a 5+, and given the Castraferrum likes to be either more of a countercharge threat or a gun turret, Tech Marine just sitting next to him, giving the occasional Battlesmith isn't that unreasonable. But I would make sure you're buying the Tech Marine for something else, as Tech Marines are very valuable, and the Castraferrum is very attractive for how cheap it is. So it might be slight overinvestment to bring a Tech Marine, when you could just bring a second Dreadnought if you account for the fact that the Tech Marine has to be attached to a unit. The cheapest you're going to get that for is probably about the same price as just another Dreadnought, which would definitely be more helpful in my opinion. But Tech Marines are very good for a lot of reasons, not just healing vehicles, of course. We'll do a video on Tech Marines probably after this little Dreadnought series I'm doing, and then we'll move on from this section. And now, without further ado, it is time to get into the Legion section. I have reformatted this, so it should be a little quicker to get through, just ever so slightly. It's a little more evenly dispersed across all the different sections. So, of course, we're starting off with Loyalist, as we always do. Dark Angels, in my opinion, Dreadwing is the most useful here, as it means plasma weapons are -1 to wound against you, and since this guy's toughness 6, that is very useful. White Scars gives you +1 move, which is excellent no matter how you're using him. Obviously, because he only moves 6, so moving 7 brings him up to standard Marine movement. Space Wolves gives you +1 weapon skill on the charge, which is mainly useful for making things like Veterans or other Dreadnoughts much less effective in combat against you, which is definitely really nice, given its poor initiative. Imperial Fist gives you +1 to hit with things like autocannons or the bolt cannons, which is nice, but relatively niche given its high ballistic skill already. Blood Angels gives you +1 to wound, which is mainly useful in Dreadnought v Dreadnought, which is some of the most important combats in the game. But this guy probably isn't your best opportunity for that, given how low his initiative is. But if you have something like a conversion beamer nearby, you could blind the Dread potentially and charge in, and this guy would destroy them in a huge positive points trade for yourself. Not that I think you need to break things down into, how many points am I getting for this and this, but it's just something to keep in mind. If this guy kills a Leviathan, for example, then he's really made back his points value, though it would be quite difficult to facilitate that. Moving on, we have the next section of Loyalists, starting off with the Iron Hands. And the Iron Hands, of course, offer -1 to wound at shooting, which is great because Plasma, Las Cannons, and Meltas all really tear this guy up, so making them slightly less effective is very handy. And Autocannons are another one worth mentioning given their strength 7. The Ultramarines, since this guy already hits on 2s, he's great for setting off your friendlies nearby to get their +1 to hit. And since a lot of his weapons are pretty long range, he should be able to be a good marker unit if you have, say, a unit of, just for example, a heavy support squad. You could, hit someone for that +1 to hit for them, and then they open up on him. And then Salamanders, in a lot of ways, is just kind of worse Iron Hands, but that's not a bad thing in this case because Plasma, Melta, and Volkite could all tear through this guy very fast. So having -1 to wound against them is very good. And then Raven Guard, of course, since this guy's a Dreadnought, he gets the Talons special rule, which means when he charges, he gets to reroll 1s to wound, which is great. As against most targets, you're already wounding on 2s in melee, and this guy, unless supported, generally doesn't want to be boxing other Dreadnoughts, unless it's like a Deredeo, in which case this guy will rip that thing in half without an issue. But, a Contemptor or a Leviathan, unless they're full ranged builds, this guy's going to be a little out of his depth there, just because of his low initiative. Moving on, we're onto the Trader section of the Legions, starting off, of course, with the Emperor's Children. Now, the Emperor's Children give you +1 initiative on the charge, is usually an absolutely excellent buff, but going from initiative 2 to 3 makes, like, I can't even think of an area where that would make difference. Maybe against something like Solar Auxilia, but you'll already be stomping them, so it doesn't really matter. Iron Warriors get +1 to strength when shooting dreads and automata, or vehicles, which is great because not only will the las cannons appreciate it, the missile launcher will really appreciate it, making it a significantly more effective weapon when it's already quite good. Night Lords, of course, give you +1 to wound when you outnumber someone or are pinning them, which isn't the most handy, given he wounds infantry on a 2+, and most other units can't fall back or be pinned. But the Gravis Missile Launcher gives you that big 5-inch blast of pinning, which could be very useful for other units to hit them with that rocket launcher to likely force a pinning test, and then other units to charge in, and that's of course very cheap, given how cheap the Gravis Missile Launcher is. World Eviers give you +1 to attack with his +1 attacks with his melee on the charge. It's very good so long as he survives long enough to use it. If he's facing a lot of, say, power mauls, that's not necessarily guaranteed, or something like Paragon Blades, for example. But against vehicles and stuff, it'd be absolutely instrumental just to make sure that whatever you're fighting dies. Next, we have to cover the next section of Traitor Legions, of course. So first up is the Death Guard, which allow you to ignore terrain in your own deployment, or things like ignore slowing down, effectively. It's useful, so this guy can deploy somewhere that's very safe, make sure he's got cover, and then he can just kind of run through it, or waddle through it, I suppose, completely safe. Thousand Suns, these guys don't get Prospering Arcana, so not much here for him specifically. Sons of Horus, it's pretty nice, as Thunderhammers can destroy Dreadnoughts very fast, so instead of them instant-killing this guy, effectively, not actually, it would have them wounding him on 3s instead of 2s, which can be very handy to either tie up a unit of, like, Justaerins for one more turn, or just, in general, keep a unit tied up for a little longer. Word Bearers, Dreads can't fail morale, and winning combats by 1 wound is pretty niche, but, you know, I guess it still has its uses. And then finally we have the Alpha Legion, which is good if you're using a ranged dread, as it means enemies have to get closer to you. You know, Melter range becomes 4 inches, Rapid Fire range for bolters becomes 10 inches. So it's a lot harder to just chip him down with close range firepower. And even things, you know, like multi-meltas would have to get closer. Everything has to get closer to you, which could eke out an extra round of shooting. Very handy. Moving on, we have the direct competitor to this guy, which is, of course, his direct successor, lore-wise at least, and that's the Contemptor. If you have the points to upgrade to a Contemptor, it's hard to argue against it just because of the overall better stats of the Contemptor. But being 50 points cheaper, if you just want ranged firepower, the Castraferrum doesn't do anything worse than what a Contemptor does. In fact, in some cases, you could argue that some of its weapons are slightly better, mainly just the missile launcher. And once you upgrade this guy to, you know, have all those weapons, he's still going to be cheaper than a Contemptor. And again, his unique weapons, the Gravis Missile Launcher, is pretty good, in my opinion. Just because missile launchers in general are the jack-of-all-trades weapons, and this is a buffed missile launcher, so better against armor, better against infantry with that big 5-inch blast. And as I mentioned, having 2 cracks is exceptional. Though for something that's more dedicated melee, I'd still say the Contemptor's worth the upgrade, but again, a dedicated melee Castraferrum, or box knot, whatever you want to call it, is only, you know, 130 points. 135 points, which is still 40 points cheaper than a Dreadnought Contemptor. And so, again, if you just need to save points, this guy will still get the job done, don't get it wrong. So these 2 guys, well, not mutually exclusive. It's usually you can start with a Castraferrum if you have the points, upgrade into a Contemptor. That's just my general rule of thumb. Or you could run both because box knots are awesome. I love them. I'd love to run some. So the Castraferrum, I know I said I was going to call it box knot, but I'm just going to call it that, is the smallest of the dreads, and its stats are the flimsiest. But it's so cheap that it doesn't matter. And its stats are still very good. You know, toughness 6 makes him immune to a lot of weapons. And just kitting him out with some ranged weapons, you know, a rocket launcher, las cannon, and a helical targeting array is 165 points. That can't be pinned, you know, it can't fail morale or anything like that, and it actually does pretty good anti-tank damage. If you wanted to, you could upgrade that rocket launcher to a second las cannon to give up the pinning for more anti-tank firepower, and you're still only 175 points in. If you wanted to go for something that's maybe more for clearing hordes, the dual flamestorms would definitely come into their own, especially in like Zone Mortalis, where flamestorms really excel. And it's just fun because Torrent is a fun rule. And his raw melee stats aren't bad, it's just held back by his poor initiative, which means I think he's better off suited as a mixed threat vehicle hunter. So bring something like the missile launcher to soften targets and pin any infantry that gets close, and a chain fist, and charge into whatever vehicle you can, because he still has a solid chance of just destroying something like a Land Raider, which for the points is exceptional. If you think you'll be facing massed Power Fists or Thunder Hammers, you can bring the Power Fist, or just Gravis Power Fist. Generally that's just my rule of thumb. Most of the time the Chain Fist is better suited for his stats, but if there's a lot of those Initiative 1 weapons, then bring a Power Fist, it's cheaper. He's not the flashiest Dread, but he's a favorite. I've been Spoons Rattling, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.